or something. I don't know. There's got to be a better way.
Well, there does have to be a better way, but it means that we have to come to some kind of philosophical agreements up front about what our goals are. And right now we seem awfully far apart on that.
Exactly.
And we seem more interested right now in demonizing the people on the other side.
Well,
that is the part I find most bothersome.
I think it's terrible that Pelosi called the new judge illegitimate. That to me just sent my blood pressure skyrocketing. What a terrible word to use for someone she felt didn't belong there.
yeah. But it seems like by doing that, Margie, what they want to do is anger us, so that instead of us making rational decisions, everybody's kind of responding either out of fear or anger. So Liz, I think you're right. I think we need to maybe we need to reestablish what our national goals are. So that would be nice if somebody could clearly restate those and not just cite the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence, but with more meat on it, what our goals should be. I like your idea. And see if we can all stand up for that or support it.
Well, as we can see, that is a powerful paragraph, and it brings up all kinds of things in us. And it brings up a lot of history in us, as well as a lot of where we stand presently. Shall we move forward, or do you want to stay with that a while?
Let's move forward.
Yeah, let's try one more.
Amid the fray of conflicting interests, where victory consists in eliminating one's opponents, how is it possible to raise our sights to recognize our neighbors or to help those who have fallen along the way? A plan that would set great goals for the development of our entire human family nowadays sounds like madness. We're growing ever more distant from one another, while the slow and demanding march toward an increasingly united and just world is suffering a new and dramatic setback.
I don't think there's a whole lot we can add to that paragraph.
No, I don't think there is.
You know, when I was out walking, I noticed people do have signs up in their yards. Instead of having Trump or Biden, they have a sign that says, this house, this family stands for justice. And I think they did Black Lives Matter. There's a whole line.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah. So you've probably seen it too out if you've been out. And I wonder if that's kind of an attempt to refocus on what as Liz was saying, try to refocus on what our goals really should be. So instead of putting out banners for which party they're supporting, they're more saying that they just want to support humanity.
We have one of those signs in our front window.
Do you?
And it says, in this house, we believe Black Lives Matter, science is real, love is love, women are people too. I forget everything that's on it, but yeah, it's a statement of values.
Yeah.
That's the problem, because it's those values. I mean, if we don't share common values, then what do we do?
Well, and I
17,
What
think
would the Pope have us do?
next paragraph addresses that.
Okay.
Okay.
to care for the world in which we live means to care for ourselves. Yet we need to think of ourselves more and more as a single family dwelling in a common home. Such care does not interest those economic powers that demand quick profits. Often the voices raised in defense of the environment are silenced or ridiculed, using apparently reasonable arguments that are merely a screen for special interests. In this shallow, short-sighted culture that we have created, bereft of a shared vision, it is foreseeable that once certain resources have been depleted, the scene will be set for new wars, albeit under the guise of noble claims. Oh, every war has noble claims.
Yep. What's the 12 mean
That's
at
a
the end of
footnote.
the paragraph?
That's
Are
a
there
footnote.
There's a
It's-
footnote. I haven't read the whole thing, so
Yeah, it's
Footnote in the back of the document.
okay.
a footnote to where that quote comes from.
Okay.
So again, there's the issue of a shared vision, and without it, it's like that quote from Proverbs: without a vision, the people perish.
Yeah.
But Pastor, don't you think that sometimes a shared vision, we may feel our statement of value or what we put in our window or what we state to be true can oftentimes be misinterpreted by those that, for example, by saying Black Lives Matter, just that one statement. Oftentimes what I'm hearing is that Black Lives Matter, but police officers don't. It's almost like an interpretation that because I state that Black Lives Matter, then I'm saying, okay, but we need to defund our police, which means what? And so it's a misinterpretation. And so a common goal, I think it goes to the core of every human being of their interpretation of that goal.
I'm sorry, I'm kind of losing you there, Karen. I'm not quite following you.
Well, I'm just saying that interpreting goals, for example, Black Lives Matter.
Right.
If I put that on my front lawn, now I'm going to have other people interpret that I am pro Black Lives Matter, but I'm not pro for law enforcement.
But
That's
media.
We're misinterpreting what is a saying or a slogan from what is actually a goal.
Yeah.
I think she's saying that we have to be careful in stating a shared vision.
You
Right.
have to have a clearly defined goal.
Yeah. Yeah. So Black Lives Matter probably isn't maybe the best way.
I wish
That
it had,
slogan may not be the best.
I wish it said all lives matter.
the problem with that is that all lives have not mattered.
I know they haven't in the past, but you know,
That's why it's a goal.
That's why it's a goal
right,
to
it's a
bring
goal.
to make their lives matter also, to make Black lives matter also.
Right. Yeah, I think it's an opportunity to invite conversation. So if someone comes up to you and you says, you've got a Black Lives Matter sign, what's the matter? You don't like the police? You could say, no, I'm 100% in favor of the police. This is a separate issue.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the ways that Black people have not been treated fairly, sometimes not by the police, often by the culture around them. Let's have that discussion. Don't just leap to the conclusion that I'm anti-police, because I'm not. You know, it's a chance to have real conversation.
And Pastor, you kind of address something that I've noticed is that we don't give each other the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
Because frankly, you know, most people want a secure life, you know, free from violence, and it's commonly held. And to have somebody say to the contrary, well, you know, let's think about that first.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've never had to worry about being pulled over because I'm white. I've never had to worry about going out jogging in any neighborhood because I'm white. I recognize I have privilege. I have friends who can't make that claim. I have friends who worry about their kids and have to give their sons the talk about how to behave if they get pulled over, or how to behave if they're in a store,
Yep.
how to not look suspicious. It's what this is. Yeah, I'm not taking down my Black Lives Matter sign.
Yep.
I'm not suggesting that you do. I'm just talking about the interpretation of and I think Bob hit it, that people don't give individuals the benefit of the doubt, or move into a conversation because the defenses go up so quickly.
And everybody jumps to the extreme.
Yeah, absolutely.
They jump to the extreme.
Yeah, I get it. And again, I would say, let's have the conversation.
You know, I think women resonate with the Black Lives Matter a little more closely than some people, even white women, because I got the talk. I got the talk as a young girl about when you're driving, be careful. If the police pull you over, make sure you drive someplace that's well lit. As in, be careful of the police. Don't get out of your car. I mean, I got that talk.
Yeah.
And don't dress flagrant sexually. You don't do those things. Now, some of that's just housed in being ladylike, but it's also to protect you from predators. So, I think women share that a little more closely, maybe or we understand it. We've experienced it, maybe not firsthand, hopefully, but we've gotten the talk, many of us.
I don't necessarily want to take away from that, but I also want to say that that's each of our own experiences. Kind of going to this point that Pastor Steve was saying about having those talks. Those talks need to happen in that gray area, at least what I believe is this gray area, that we do all have our own ideas and values, and they're not mutually exclusive. Some of them do overlap, some of them don't overlap. And I think that even just having statements like Black Lives Matter is an invitation to have a conversation, but it also, I've lost my train of thought here. I apologize, but the ideas that defunding the police and Black Lives Matter are two separate ideas, and they need to be separated, yet they somehow also also collide with one another in an intersectionality of our lives, of being multiple things at all times. And I think that that's something that we also need to take into consideration, that there are multiple things all happening at the same time, and they are all interconnected. So.
Does anybody understand what defund the police means?
It means
Yeah,
different
it's
things to
two
different
different
people.
things.
I know.
Now
They
that's a
don't
slogan
even,
that needs work.
yeah, I don't
Yes.
understand what,
The original idea behind that was that you would take some of the funding away from the police and give it to the social services that are needed, because the police are ending up taking care of problems that are not really law enforcement problems. For instance, they're spending a lot of time dealing with homeless people on the street and dealing with domestic situations that don't necessarily need police officers to deal with them. You could have special units of specially trained social workers who could respond to those kinds of situations. Healthcare workers, and that kind of thing. It's an interesting idea. It needs to be more well thought out, and it shouldn't have. It's a slogan that appeared too early and it needs work, in my opinion.
right,
But
should
I
be
think that
tossed
really,
out.
I think that that really has to do with how we, like, the value that we have on language, because defund doesn't necessarily mean that it is inherently wrong. There's something that's really bad with it. It literally, at least from how I interpret that, right? My interpretation is that we were going to take funding and allocate it in other ways. So I think it also has to do with diction and how the words that we use and the values that we instill into those words that we use, because people hear defund and they automatically assume that all things are bad and it's negative, when it doesn't necessarily carry that value. So I think that while I agree with you that that idea needs to be reworked and perhaps better diction can be used, I think that we shouldn't just shun certain ideas before truly understanding what they stand for.
Yeah.
Just because somebody uses particular language that we deem as being offensive, I guess.
Well, there's not really a good catchy word to say reallocate funding of, which is what it really means, but that not as good on a slogan, So, I mean, if there were a word for that, that would be more precise, that would be better. But
I don't want to get too far off track here. Richard Rohr would also suggest that we have a tendency toward binary thinking. And so in all of these categories we've been talking about, we tend to think good or bad. And really, the topics we're talking about don't necessarily lend themselves to thinking in a binary way that way. Again, this is where we need to look at things more broadly and think about things more subtly and find out where we have common ground and where we might find some ideas that work for all of us. Shall we keep moving?
Yes.
Some parts of our human family, it appears, can be readily sacrificed for the sake of others, considered worthy of a carefree existence. Ultimately, persons are no longer seen as a paramount value to be cared for and respected, especially when they're poor and disabled, not yet useful, like the unborn, or no longer needed, like the elderly. We've grown indifferent to all kinds of wastefulness, starting with the waste of food, which is deplorable in the extreme. I think I mentioned this last week, and I'll just say it briefly again. One of the problems with capitalism as a philosophical form of thought that guides so much of our democracy is that it regards persons as an item on the balance sheet. You're either an asset or a liability. And I think that it tends to filter into our day-to-day thinking sometimes, that we see people that way, as assets or as liabilities. Prove me wrong. The waste of food, I gotta say that bothers me. It's just Mary and me here at the house. And I go to the store, I go grocery shopping, especially if I go to Costco. You know, you can't buy anything for two people at Costco.
Right.
So sometimes I'll buy stuff and we give part of it to Brooke and PA and the kids. But sometimes I'll buy stuff that'll keep and we'll use it for a while. But even when I just go to the regular supermarket, a lot of times the smallest portion I can get of something is more than the two of us can eat while it's still fresh.
Mm-hmm.
And we end up throwing away food, and it just bothers me. I mean, we try not to. We try to be careful about it, but
The flip side of that is packaging of food.
yeah.
And the reason why I bring that up is after living in Italy, you realize we go to the grocery store more often, so we don't, at least myself and my friends and other people I know in Italy, there is less food waste in that regard because we use the ingredients in our homes a little bit better. We don't have places to store things. We don't have the refrigerator space or the kitchen cupboard space, etc. So grocery shopping happens more often. You also have to carry everything home, which I think when I go back, I will invest in one of those little rolly carts because groceries become heavy, right? They're very heavy. So you don't buy as much from the grocery store, but in buying things in smaller packages, there is always going to be a bag or a box or a this or a that they're packaged in. And especially with COVID right now, I totally understand why we would want things to be packaged in a particular way. But in general, I think that there's a lot of waste that happens just in our packaging of having to have, let's just say a wheat thins box, right? So you've got your box and then you have a bag inside the box and you have particular plastics that are built up inside the box and glue and all these things that go into the processing of just the box of wheat thins, right? So it's incredible like how packaging and etc. also plays into that that idea of wastefulness just for food. And how do you get around that idea of what to do? So if we're using less foods, then we have more packaging because we have smaller amounts of food being packaged.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a conundrum too, because we've had issues with tampering in the past. And then of course you want to preserve freshness and yada, yada, yada.
Yep. And how far is it being transported between the bakery that makes it and the store and then used? So they're trying to keep it in a form that it's shippable. I I mean, even
Right.
even our produce suffers from that.
Mhm.
I mean, they hybridize our tomatoes so that they can withstand shipping instead of having a softer skin and being more tasty. So I don't know, that's getting way beyond. It affects our life in so many ways.
Yeah.
But you notice that the focus is indifference, and so it's this desensitization that's important to recognize.
Yeah, good point. 19, a decline in the birth rate, which leads to the aging of the population together with the relegation of the elderly to a sad and lonely existence, is a subtle way of stating that it's all about us, that our individual concerns are the only thing that matters. In this way, what is thrown away are not only food and dispensable objects, but often human beings themselves. We've seen what happened with the elderly in certain places in our world as a result of the coronavirus. They did not have to die that way. Yet something similar had long been occurring during heat waves and in other situations. Older people found themselves cruelly abandoned. We fail to realize that by isolating the elderly and leaving them in the care of others without the closeness and concern of family members, we disfigure and impoverish the family itself. We also end up depriving young people of a necessary connection to their roots and a wisdom that the young cannot achieve on their own. And here I would say that perhaps the Pope is idealizing the elderly a bit.
And
I beg your pardon.
Well,
Not you.
what surprises me is the decline in birth rate, which I think that's happening in Italy, but in most of the world, it's an increase in birth rate.
Well, it depends on where you look.
I guess.
Yeah, in China and in India, the birth rate is increasing, and in certain parts of sub-Saharan Africa. In much of the rest of the world, it's been decreasing, especially in Western nations.
And Japan.
Yeah, in Japan.
I see the effects of some of this statement with the COVID crisis and the elderly who are in nursing and assisted living places because they can't have visitors. My sister-in-law was going to be 100 in June, and she hung on until about April, and finally even her doctor said the fact of having a 100-year birthday was important to her, that she was fighting for her life every day. She just was old and frail, nothing specifically wrong with her. But after March, then her family couldn't come and visit her. They could only talk through the window and stuff like that. And BJ just gave up. And even her doctor said, I think she just got tired of waiting for June 10th. So, and that is a big problem with our elderly in assisted living right now. It's especially heightened during the COVID crisis.
Yeah.
Wonder what he means. That does not have to die that way. They do not have to die that way. So, I mean, is he specifically addressing COVID? That it wasn't handled. It could have been handled a different. I don't see the solution to that readily. Right now I don't see it. The other thing, I actually agree with the decline in the birth rate. I think the world is holding too many people. I think that can possibly solve a lot of our issues. Like, how are we going to feed everybody? Are we going to all have clean water? So I have a little trouble with that very first
I think that statement
phrase.
refers to the COVID crisis, that people, it's their own fault in some ways because they didn't wear the mask. Some still don't practice social distancing and all that. So in a way, that is their own fault. But, and I think he is just applying the one sentence to the other, not anything globally, if you get what I'm trying to say.
Well, he might just be talking about dying alone.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true too.
It also seems as though what he's saying is that, you know, if you move to the end of the paragraph, that people used to be that we used to have the elderly and they would stay with the family unit.
Right.
People took care of their moms and dads and grandparents in the home. And it did, you know, the benefit of young people in being able to understand who these older people were. But now we've kind of removed them to different living environments rather than taking care of them in our homes.
Right. At even a higher level, I think that, and kind of consistent with the tone of the encyclical, is that he's saying that, you know, that it grows out of selfishness.
Boy, howdy.
And so, you know, that it's the stating that it's all about us, that our individual concerns are the only things that matter. And so I think he's, again, focusing on that we're being selfish rather than thinking of the broader picture.
I think you're right about that, Bob. I think that's what he's saying. When I said I think he's idealizing older people, I say that as someone who had an older person who is beginning to slip, living in our home. And
uh-oh, did we lose him?
He's frozen.
Apparently, he's
frozen.
Whatever it is, he's not moving, and neither are his lips. Something is stalled.
We lost you, Steve.
You're frozen, Steve.
Yeah.
He'll no doubt log back on if it comes to that.
You may not know he's.
He may still be talking, eh?
Yeah, right. And he may not know that he's frozen on screen.
Yeah, you know, goodness knows that's happened.
We might just, this is the best sermon he ever gave.
Is somebody trying to contact him? I will if nobody else.
He's dropped off. He's logging back in. He's no longer.
He'll come back.
Yeah.
I think what he might have been trying to address is the fact that I don't know how well equipped we are as in this country in general to provide the kind of care that people who are older, who are living a lot longer, require. And that becomes a real dilemma, because if you're not capable of providing the medical nursing level of care that is required, then it makes a real dilemma for people. I think that's what he was.
Yeah.
I would actually like to add to that just the shifts in family units and what it takes to have a home in the United States. These days, speaking for myself, it takes more than one person's paycheck to live in Southern California. And when you need two paychecks, that means two adults. If there are children involved, someone's got to take care of the children while the parents are working. So there's no time for no one to care for the children, nor the elderly parents, the grandparents, right? So what are the solutions for fixing that issue. And I know earlier we had talked about living wages and why minimum wages has not been addressed, but I think that that's a very big problem that we have here in the United States is we do have this separation of all the different generations that other societies, I can at least speak for Italian families. Italian families don't live necessarily in the same home any longer, but they see each other far more often than perhaps my American family does when we get together for family gatherings and such. And so I wonder, as Americans, how do we go about trying to remedy this, that we do have this separation, but perhaps it is living wages and other things that keep us from having that togetherness?
I would add to that, to our mobility, is that we move around so much.
Well, and that being a good point too, Liz, just to go to, if it takes two working people, then, there's no one to care for the elderly person. So having the elderly person live with you doesn't solve the problem.
Yep.
And we should identify that he's not saying that they have that the elderly person has to live with somebody. He's talking about isolation and without closeness and concern, and that's not necessarily living together.
He also, in a strange way, kind of raises the issue of how we die. That's a whole other issue. I've been reading some other things about that lately, and maybe we can come back to that another time. I'm sorry, my internet connection did wacky things there for a minute. Both Mary and I are online on Zoom right now. So maybe that had something to do with it.
Froze at a pivotal moment. We're not entirely sure what you were going to say, and so I filled in what I thought you might be wanting to say.
Oh, that would be interesting to hear what you thought I was going to say.
I'm usually not right, so whatever I said.
Shall we move? We've got 5 more minutes. Shall we move to paragraph 20?
Okay.
This way of discarding others can take a variety of forms, such as an obsession with reducing labor costs with no concern for its grave consequences, since the unemployment that it directly generates leads to the expansion of poverty. In addition, a readiness to discard others finds expression in vicious attitudes that we thought long past, such as racism, which retreats underground only to keep reemerging. Instances of racism continue to shame us, for they show that our supposed social progress is not as real or definitive as we think.
That's well said, that last sentence, 2 sentences. Ugh.
Yeah. Retreats underground only to keep reemerging. I was really surprised, I don't know why, but I was really surprised when COVID first arrived in this country, that suddenly there were all kinds of instances of anti-Chinese violence.
That's true.
Why did that surprise you?
It surprised me that people would assume that basic everyday Chinese people on the streets of the United States would somehow or another have something to do with this virus having arisen here.
Okay, and now I see what point you're making. Okay.
It's like, how stupid can you be?
It is stupid.
Well, I think it's just the disappointment. I mean, that's what I've been experiencing, the magnitude of the disappointment to realize that you know, when I think we're beginning to evolve as people, we're beginning to improve our interrelations and our perspectives and all that. And then to see it go so far backwards is just devastating. It's like, you know, what does this mean, you know, in the overall picture of the world? Does this mean that we just really aren't ever going to get to that point, or what? Well, I mean, that's the kind of despair that I'm feeling that this, you know, this totally addresses. But again, I'm not sure how we're supposed to fix that. How do we deal with it? I mean, what, you know, I don't know. I don't mean to be.
It's sort of like World War II and picking up all Japanese because the other guy bombed Pearl Harbor.
Yeah. Yeah. People who had been in this country for 2-3 generations, all of a sudden.
Yeah, had to go to Manzanar. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, they are among the first volunteering to go fight.
Yes.
Yes.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, it makes you proud to be human. Well, that's it. We're about out of time for this. This has been, I am astonished at how insightful this is and also how much it raises in us. But I think that's good. It's clear that it touches a lot of areas that are tender in our own hearts and our own consciences. And that's good, because it means we are aware that we all have work to do, and we are aware of the places in life that make us sad and where we need to reach out to grow. So a closing prayer. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
God of love, God of togetherness, God of community, heal our hearts, heal our souls, heal us by the good work of growing together in faith, hope, love, and community through the love of Jesus Christ our Lord and by the power of your Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Go in peace, my friends. I'll see you on Sunday.
We leaving off at 20 or 21?
21. We'll come in at 21.
Okay. Thank you.
Right. Bye-bye.
Bye.